Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Hall with the Institute for Emerging Issues, a nonpartisan public policy and convening organization at NC State University. I'm pleased to welcome you to the second episode in our Talent First Tuesday series. Earlier this year, we held our annual Emerging Issues Forum that centered on growing the state's workforce with a focus on removing barriers for those who have historically, systemically, or a result of COVID-19, had difficulties connecting and engaging in the workforce. The forum featured thought leaders and community practitioners who shared their knowledge and experience on how best to address this challenge or these challenges. We also had several breakout sessions that were extremely popular with participants, each focused on one unique yet very much intersectional group that faces workforce barriers. The biggest complaint? Not being able to attend more than one discussion while at the forum. And of course, not everyone was able to attend the forum. So in response, we wanted to revisit each breakout session and let you be a part of the discussion again, or join us for the first time. Today, we've brought back some of our speakers to provide high-level data and discuss an initial set of recommendations and tactics to help support military veterans and their families connect and engage in good jobs. After we hear from them, we'll stop recording and use our remaining time to share our collective ideas for how these recommendations could come to life in your communities and regions. Before we begin, I want to provide some background about how the recommendations and tactics came to be. First, we received support from the U.S. Economic Development Administration and convened a task force comprised of those with systems-level workforce experience and individuals with current or recent lived experience in facing employment barriers. It was co-chaired by Annie Izod, Executive Director of the NC Works Commission, and Philip Cooper, IEI practitioner in residence and workforce equity advocate with the Land of Sky Regional Council. In total, 65 task force members represented 5 working groups. They met 4 times from September to November of 2022 and identified a set of challenges they wanted to work on. Their recommendations and tactics were further discussed and refined at the forum, and we'll be sharing some of those with you this morning. There were also 7 cross-cutting themes that I want you to keep in mind during this discussion. The first, ensuring that the resources available are not only easy to access, but relevant and created by those with lived experience. The second one, ensuring that there are comprehensive career pathways that meet the needs of businesses, but are also meeting the needs of underrepresented groups. And that takes intentionality and collaboration to achieve. The third, let's make sure our job postings are shorter, easy to understand and complete, and emphasize the key skills needed to actually do the work. Next, in order for people to consistently engage in their jobs, we need to acknowledge that there are systems that they rely on to make that happen. And we need to support the workers in those systems too. We need childcare providers, before and after school care, reliable transportation, healthcare workers, and many more. And overwhelmingly, we need to support community and workforce navigators that are serving as bridge builders and connectors. Next, we need to make it easier for our boots on the ground service providers to do what they do best, so they aren't spending all of their time on looking for and administering grant funds. And they need to be more flexible sources of funding to meet the needs of some of our most underrepresented workers. It's not one size fits all, and neither should the metrics be. We shouldn't expect people to do this work alone. We can always be learning from one another and sharing what we're learning and sharing our successes. Peer learning is a great way to accomplish this. And finally, proximity matters. Place those with the trust of the community with the service providers. Not only does proximity make it easier for the individuals to access services, it helps the advocates and providers better coordinate and problem solve in a timely way. And so again, those were some cross-cutting recommendations across all of our workforce groups that we wanted to share with you today. So let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce NC State's very own Michael Mullins, who will moderate the discussion. Michael is Director of Defense Industry Initiatives as part of NC State University's Industry Expansion Solutions, as well as a former Marine, retiring as an Army Lieutenant Colonel, spending the majority of his career at Fort Bragg, which will be named next month to Fort Liberty. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today and for introducing our distinguished guests. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you for the opportunity to follow up from the forum in February and continue the dialogue and the discussion on how we can better help veterans and their family members transition from the service into quality jobs in North Carolina. One of the things that I think some people may not be aware of is just how military friendly and centric North Carolina is. We have the third largest active duty footprint of the military in the nation after California and Texas. Some people say the fourth. Virginia and North Carolina are very close, but I'll go with third today. And we're very fortunate to have such a large force in North Carolina, which provides us a significant number of veterans and family members that transition or retire out of the military from places like Fort Bragg or Fort Liberty to Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point, et cetera, into jobs in North Carolina. And there are those states that do not have a very large number of veterans in their state. And we just need to make sure we're doing everything we can do to keep them in North Carolina because of the enormous skills they bring, not just technical skills from their occupation, whether it's aviation maintenance or logistics, but also their incredible soft skills of leadership, initiative, mission focused, et cetera, that as a person who works with companies every day across North Carolina, and I hear the workforce being the number 1, 2, and 3 challenge of industry across the spectrum in North Carolina. It's these soft skills that many CEOs are really focused on because the skills can be trained. You just can't take a person and teach those soft skills overnight. But today we've got 4 individuals with us that are on a panel group with us that also participated in the February forum at NC State, at the McKinnon Center. And I'd like to each of them to quickly introduce themselves if they would, and tell us the organization that they represent. So Josh, if you could go first, please.
Sure. I'm Josh Levy. I work for the Department of Commerce, the North Carolina Department of Commerce, in our Labor and Economic Analysis Division, and I'm a policy analyst there. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Erin?
I'm Erin Ananian-Gentile, and I work for the North Carolina Military Business Center, and I'm a business development professional, and I also do workforce development for the NCMBC.
Thank you, Erin. So with that note, I think it's time for data. And I'd like to turn it over to Josh to present. Thank you.
Great. Again, thank you for the invitation to come speak to you all about transitioning military personnel in North Carolina as a follow-up to our discussion in February. So as I said, I'm with the North Carolina Department of Commerce, and I'm going to be sharing some data from a military impact report that was released last fall. We carried out this report on behalf of the Military Affairs Commission and in partnership with the Department of Military and Veteran Affairs. And we also engaged some consultants at Regional Economic Models, or REMI, to do the economic impact modeling piece of this report. So one of the, I think, most important takeaways from this data is that there are large numbers of individuals currently serving in active duty at bases in North Carolina who are projected to separate from the military in the next few years. So this table is showing from 2022, over the course of those 4 years, there's going to be almost 75,000 individuals who are projected to separate. You can see the grand totals at the bottom there, and by branch and which year. And so this is a unique opportunity, I think, for businesses and economies to benefit. So we know that probably the most immediate benefit to these individuals could be as a new labor source, right? A new supply of workers, both for the military personnel as well as their families. So many folks with spouses, children. They're also a potential source for business creation, right, through entrepreneurship. And then just more generally, retaining these individuals within their regions and their state, adds more people, taxpayers, citizens, particularly in areas of the state that could use additional people and could use a more diversified economy. And so these are some of the benefits that we're thinking about in looking at this population. So what do we know about these individuals? The overwhelming consensus is they're relatively young. So about half of the some of the individuals who've separated recently were under 30. 3/4 were under 40. So this makes sense where you have a relatively young active duty population, and many people may do a single term and leave, or a few. We know that their formal educational credentials vary. You can see that about 70% of them have a high school degree or equivalent. Small numbers with some college or associate's degrees. About 14% have bachelor's degree, 5% have higher than that. But of course, they also have very specialized skills from doing, activities associated with their military duties. We know that in North Carolina, among the active duty population, very skewed gender dynamics there. 88% male versus 12% female, and that's actually more skewed than the U.S. population, active duty population. More heavily white than minority, and that's also more skewed. And as we mentioned, young, the average age being 27.3 years. Half of them are married, more than a third have children, although 47% are single with no children. So we've got a diverse group here. When we look at the U.S. data for separations, we can see that about half of them are voluntary. 27% were involuntary, which has some separate categories within that, and about 24% will formal retirements, although keeping in mind that folks that are retiring can be relatively young. This table shows some of the most common military occupational titles in North Carolina, as well as some potential civilian occupations that could emerge from those. And so this is based on a crosswalk that ONET puts together, which looks at a variety of civilian occupations that have some relationships to this. Now, it doesn't mean that people will necessarily continue to work in the same occupation that they did in the military, but it gives a sense of what some of the relevant skills may be. So there is a question of, with this large number of people separating, how many will actually stay in North Carolina? We don't have great data on this now, but we have a couple different ways that we can try to answer this question. So one way is to look at the home of record, so the state home of record for the active duty population. As you can see from this table that North Carolina is the third highest, almost 8%, and you can see some of the other states that people are essentially either enlisting from or using as their home of record, and so it's quite possible that many of those people will return to their home of record. We also could draw on some survey data. This was a survey that was done by two researchers at Fayetteville State University. It was a convenience sample of nearly 500 individuals who were getting ready to separate. Most of them were from Fort Bragg, although there were some other places represented. And about 40% of those individuals said they plan to stay in North Carolina. Those that were not going to stay were going to places like Texas, Florida, California, Georgia, Virginia, which were also some of those top states for home of record. So that makes sense. And 39% had lived in the desired state prior to military service. So that makes sense for them to be returning. The survey asked about what kinds of things were important to these people in making their decisions. Obviously, employment, housing values, and the general cost of living were top reasons cited. Transferability of occupational licenses was not necessarily a top factor for this group. Taxing retirement pay, which was being phased out at the time that the survey was administered, it's probably no longer an issue. But there was a pretty big difference by their age and length of service. So more retirees said that they plan to stay in North Carolina than other types of separation. So again, the retirees who are would be relatively older, would have the most experience and skills, and because they had been there the longest, maybe the more of a connection to the community. So some of the other suggestions that people provided centered around lowering taxes, assistance for finding employment, either for them or for their spouse. So almost half of these folks planned to work full time. 36% plan to enroll in college full time. So as we saw from their educational credentials earlier, many of them had a high school degree, and so now had the ability to go back to school. Some plan to enroll or work part time or start their own business. So, and you can see some of the top job areas that they mentioned going into. The Pew Charitable Trust did a national survey in 2019, which I think is informative. They're specifically looking at people that are coming out of the what they're calling the post 9/11 generation. And so they found about 25% already had a job lined up when they left the military. Half looked for a job right away. And among those who looked for a job, 57% had one less than 6 months. And then, as we saw in North Carolina, about half said they enrolled in school, a little higher than what we saw, and they were more likely to enroll in school full time. For those who worked in a civilian job, a lot of them felt like they were actually overqualified for their first post-military job. And so that's another issue to kind of be aware of. And over half stayed in their first job for more than a year. And so I think we can take some of the takeaways from this survey and other things that we've seen, and try to think a little bit about how transitioning military personnel could be underutilized, right? So how can we create strategies to retain more people, and particularly thinking about the different types of people that are separating. So whether they're retirees or maybe younger folks with less experience, we may want to have different strategies for those different segments. Some of the folks that are separating may have disabilities, and there may be other barriers to employment that the workforce development system may be able to assist with. We talked about trying to connect people to both employers and educators to this population. The fact that maybe if half of these individuals are going to go back to school, that is probably a good thing in the long term, but it may mean that they're not an immediate labor supply, but they may be a labor supply in a few years as they finish school. And then just overall, how can we make the state more inviting to these people? So people talked about, quality of life, cost of living, being parts of communities. Those are all things that generally improve are worth doing anyway, right? But could make these regions and the state more appealing to this population. So with that, I'm going to pause, and I'm happy to turn it back over to Mike or answer any questions now, or wait as we get into the discussion. But thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. And there are no questions for Josh. And all right, can we have the we're going to go through the recommendations and tactics slide. I believe everyone that's attending this webinar has been given the challenge, recommendation, and tactics slides that were developed as a part of the task force that Sarah described earlier in the presentation. So I think hopefully you've had the opportunity to take a look at this. But the task force, as Sarah mentioned, met over a series of months, and we brought in individuals from a variety of organizations and agencies like the Military Business Center and Duke Energy, where Tyler works, and other organizations that work with transitioning veterans and their family members, and to identify those challenges that exist and what recommendations that not only we came up with, but the attendees of the forum in February. That was a great opportunity for the attendees to also provide their input, which really enhanced and improved the document that we had developed initially. And then what tactics that we needed to implement to be able to meet those challenges more effectively, I think, recruit and retain not only the veterans, but I think very importantly, we say the families, but a lot of times it gets really focused on the veterans. And I say that because as a veteran, as a retired military, if the spouse, he or she, finds good employment in North Carolina, it's more likely that the veteran's going to stay as well. And so I know last couple of weeks ago, we had a young lady who's a CEO from our Riveter present in High Point to a group of about 110 individuals that were attending a defense outreach event at the Cogden Yards. And her focus was on spouses of active military and actually manufacturing purses and handbags, et cetera, very high quality in items that she's been very successful and received funding through Shark Tank. So I always ask people to keep in mind spouses, children. This is a package deal when you start talking about military and families when it comes to employment and retirement and where they're going to stay when they get out of the Army, whether it's 5 or 25 years. But I'll just mention one challenge is this excess programs or a sea of goodwill. Veterans have so many different organizations and options to consider. And many of these veterans, keep in mind, have never even had civilian employment. Think about it. 4 or 5 years in the military, or maybe somebody who went in the Army as a lieutenant out of college and they get out as a captain or even a lieutenant colonel, have never had civilian employment in their lives. So it can be really overwhelming. And so when you think about the hundreds, if not thousands of organizations that exist in the United States that help veterans and family members not only find employment, but with a variety of other challenges that they face, it can be a daunting task for them to work their way through, to navigate through these kind of really difficult waters and really determine what is the most beneficial source to go to or resources to use for them. So today we have, again, several individuals with us on the panel to better understand these recommendations. And they're going to share some of the context and why the ideas that were generated kind of rose to the top. So these recommendations and tactics for the panel members, what's the most important to you and why? So if one of you can go ahead and start, we'll go from there. Erin?
Okay. Well, I think from the forum till now, the one that comes up to the top most, I think has changed. And I do think it's not so much the sea of goodwill because, I mean, there are a bunch of organizations out there doing the same thing. And sometimes it's really tough when you're seeing TV commercials or, getting spam emails or seeing things pop up in your Facebook feed because you happen to be, military heavy in what you're talking about. If they're, verified, if they're actually, doing the things that they say they do, and they're not like a shell company to be a nonprofit. But I'm thinking that a lot about biases and assumptions about military service members. I read an interesting paper the other day about female veterans. So, I mean, and I can cite some national numbers if you want, but, it's talking about how, when females come out of the military, they are less likely to get a job right away than their male counterparts. They're dealing with things like, they could have had a sexual assault or some kind of trauma associated with their service, and even in combat. But these things aren't, things that would stop them from being productive employees. Let's see. So 61% of females are coming out underemployed or unemployed. And a lot of their worries have to do with childcare. They also have to deal with starting at the bottom, like Michael just stated. It was Josh who stated that, a lot of them are starting out from the bottom, overqualified for the jobs probably, and not getting paid enough. And then some women come out thinking they're not even veterans. They don't view themselves as veterans. So there's a lot of, I think, education that could be done on both the employer and the veteran side about assistance that could be given. But the barriers that they do have, like I said, even if someone comes out of the military with a total and permanent disability of 100%, that doesn't mean that they can't perform a job to, as good as anyone else. It's just the way the military rates them. So I think that is the thing that's changed for me. I think I'm really on the biases and assumptions about military service members that limit their opportunity.
Right. Well, thanks, Erin. Tyler, what challenge with the recommendations and tactics really resonated with you, and why?
I think the biggest thing and I've kind of shifted as well a little bit. I think one of the biggest issues is like educating employers on the benefits of veterans, and not really educating them, but getting them to understand. So I didn't get to introduce myself. I apologize for the audio issues. I work for Duke Energy. I am the chair of our Veterans Employee Resource Group. So we help incoming veterans that have self-identified as veterans and don't want to participate. We bring them into our group and we help assist them as they transition from military life to corporate life, or if they're just, from past, give them a resource that they can, bend our ear if they need to, et cetera. And so I have worked to try and educate our leadership on the value and the benefit of dedicating resources to bringing in veterans. It seems that not just with Duke Energy, but with a lot of companies in North Carolina, their real goal and plan is to just, we're in the, like for Duke, we're in the energy industry, just by, we're going to organically, we're just going to bring in veterans. Our veteran numbers are going to come in without really any extra effort. And I really see that is not ultimately the best way to go about it, because we have so many opportunities that we're missing out on. And I don't know the answer, but it's something that I've been trying to work on. I'm not anybody important at the company, so I'm a big man with a little voice. But I've talked to a lot of people, and I think that getting leadership to understand the value is what is really the issue that I'm facing the most now. I haven't come to a solution yet, but I think that's really important.
Tyler, that made me think of another question I'd like to pose to you and to Erin as well. Is we talk a lot about recruiting, but one of the things that I've discovered in working with the companies that I have across North Carolina is sometimes we need to be talking a little bit more about retention. Because it's one thing to recruit a veteran, it's another thing to keep a veteran because of that company culture and the way that veteran is received and maybe sponsored, or what type of programs are in place to maybe accommodate his or her needs. So could you speak to that a little bit about maybe your experiences or thoughts, or maybe lessons that you've seen that you could share with our attendees?
I think that I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Just some of the issues that veterans face when it comes in industry, retaining them after they've hired them, that in a number of cases I've seen, veterans may depart early because of a lack of programs or understanding about the challenges that they face. And I just wonder if you had any insight or thoughts about that.
I think a lot of it, and this is just me talking as a military spouse, I'm not a veteran. But, and with my work with veterans and transitioning service members, I think that, both sides, the employer and the service member, have expectations that don't meet. For example, I think military, they are very focused on upward mobility, that rank and getting to the next level and doing what they have to do in the next level. Some of the civilian counterparts may not be, that into it, or, we have companies that instead of hiring from within, they hire from without. So I think that could be a problem. I do also think that sometimes, especially a brand new transitioning service member, especially if they are the head of the household, the breadwinner, so to speak, I think that they maybe have, especially if they're not retiring and don't have that, the benefits to fall back on, I think that they may get caught in that, well, I need to take whatever I can get right now. So I'm making a paycheck and I'm able to take care of my family. And then while I have a job, they say it's easier to find a job when you have a job, so get a little bit of civilian experience and then move on to something that, maybe pays more, or something that's more in line with what they want to do for the rest of their career.
Okay, well, something you just brought up, Erin, maybe, we haven't really discussed this, but maybe distinguishing to some degree between a young enlisted or even a young officer versus someone who has 20 or 25 years, 30 years in the military. And, there's maybe a very different, maybe a different approach is something that needs to be discussed by industry because of the different needs and requirements of those individuals. So, I would suggest that industry did you have something in mind about that?
Well, and you probably know very much from experience, both of you, that there is a huge difference in personalities between enlisted and officer, as well as young enlisted and the E9s out there. So if you have someone who's coming out of the military, and I can take my husband for example, he had 3 or 4 job offers around the country before he even retired. Once the community found out he was retiring, they were coming after him. Now that is the exception, not the rule. A lot of people coming out may find that, but he was really lucky that he could flow into something that matched what he did in the military. So even before he went on terminal, he was working. I think when I was doing transition readiness with the younger enlisted, they well, let me put it this way. A lot of the times when you're in the military, you're told that, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just from what I've heard, that, oh, you're in the military, you're going to get a job really right away. Once they see military on your, and, the federal government is good at this because they say, there's always that veterans preference and things of that nature, and in state government. But what they don't understand is that that's not always the case. And that they are going to be probably working from the bottom up more so than those who are retiring. Also, some of the younger generation just don't get it. I'll go back to one of my favorite examples. I had a Marine who was getting administratively separated. So it wasn't a good reason that he was getting out. And he was convinced that he was going to go back home and become a sheriff. So, when I asked him about how do you plan on doing this with the fact that, you're getting, administratively separated from the Marine Corps, he's like, oh, I know everybody there. I know the people there. And, I try to explain to him that probably not going to get you where you want to go, but, there's not much you can do to change a young guy's mind. So I think there's definitely those type of expectations that, generally those that are retiring are either going to retire and live out their, on their benefits, or I've seen a lot get jobs in contracting that are related to what they've done in the military. Officers, I mean, the young ones and the the 09 or higher ranking, same thing as enlisted with their with their assumptions as they get out. So
all right. Are we still on the same question?
Well, we were talking about retention as well, but I'd be really interested also, I think, at this point of maybe for any industry participants we have, or what are some of the things that you've seen? Because I've seen companies that do this very well, and I've seen other companies that don't do it very well, and they just don't have the knowledge and understanding. And it's not a hit on them. It's a little bit of a drive from Western North Carolina down to a Fort Bragg Transition Assistance Program event. Spend a couple of days and career fair, et cetera. But especially for small businesses that are out there, any thoughts or recommendations that would help them do a better job of maybe successfully recruiting veterans that you've seen your company, your organization, or other companies do that you could share? Tyler?
Yeah, I think for the larger companies, I think that obviously have some more money to work with. I think investing in their veterans is key to retention. I think that celebrating veterans, allowing veterans to join the employee resource group that like part of, allowing us to go out and have periods of customer service and volunteer work in the community. I think that ultimately all helps. I think how the company publicly views and celebrates their veterans helps. I think with when it comes to smaller companies, small businesses, I think that, I'm going to give you an example. So for larger corporations, Duke Energy, maybe Wells Fargo, Bank of America, I'm just throwing company names out there. If you look at a job and you're a transitioning veteran and you see the position and it's, you must have this a degree in this, and you must have this, and you must have this, and there's so much red tape and rules and regulations on what the experiences and stuff like that the veteran needs to have. Whereas when it's a smaller business owned by, just a mom and pop, or somebody who has a construction company or something like that, they can actually bring that veteran in, find out what their are and say, okay, they may need to learn a couple little things here, but they're a good person, or I can tell to be a good employee, a good leader, and they can bring them in. So I think that the value, and I think that whenever you have a small business that's doing stuff like that, that veteran is going to feel way more valued than the veteran who's like, I could clearly do this job, but I didn't check this one box, so I can't do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you have anything you'd like to add, Erin? No?
No,
Okay.
I think he nailed it. I also do think that sometimes businesses talk the talk, but don't walk the walk. Like, they want to have veterans on their team, but they either don't know how to do it, or they're looking at it like, I don't know, a status symbol, or, and again, the federal government has made this very easy with the hired vets medallions. And I know down to the local areas, for the smaller businesses, they do, local celebrate or recognitions of things like that. But I think it really is going to take connection and employers who are empathetic and who can look past, trauma, or, PTSD, any physical ailment, and like Tyler said, use them for what they can do, not what credentials or degrees they hold.
Okay. Well, listen, on that note,
Yeah.
go ahead, Tyler.
I just want to really quick. And the thing is, when you circle back to retention, when the company talks the talk, they don't walk the walk. The public may, obviously see it at face value, but the employees are the ones that notice that, and that ultimately is what can cause a problem.
Got it. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that, and thank you both. But we're going to go ahead and pause the recording right now.
So thank you all again. We will also share all of our Talent First Tuesday recordings on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. These links can be found on our website at emergingissues.org. And next, I want to have you join us May 16th for the next of two in our series, a doubleheader focused on families with young children at 9 a.m. And at 10 a.m., individuals with disability and neurodiversity. And we already touched upon those two groups in this conversation, just recognizing how intersectional these different groups are. And so for more information, go to emergingissues.org. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day. And until next time, let's stay connected.